Welcome to the In Factor, conversations with entrepreneurs who started, stumbled, and succeeded. I'm Rebecca White, and today I'm pleased to bring to the show Lara Jones, who's one of the most respected speakers on grit and also an award-winning grit performance expert, keynote speaker, and creator of the Global Grit system. She's also a book author, and from everything I can see, has an amazing story to share. So I am very excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for sharing your wonderful audience with me today as well.
Absolutely. We were just talking about met through one of my former graduate students, and your topic, I think, is incredibly important for all of our entrepreneurship students to hear. And I think it's an important one for people of all walks of life. So I'm sure you have lots to do talking about staying resilient and endurance and overcoming the failures and challenges of life.
Absolutely, Rebecca. Well, here's the thing. I'm obviously known as a grit development expert, as you mentioned, but I never wanted to be known for grit, right? It's not something that you wake up every day thinking, yes, I want to go through challenges in life and show everyone else. But the thing of it is that success is a word that many people use and may achieve, but there's many out there that may fail trying to get there. Okay. And that's where you find that half the people will run back to their comfort zone because they don't know how to push forward, right? They don't know what to do next. And so they run back to their safety. And actually, if you look back 10,000 years ago, I mean, our brains are doing what they're supposed to do, right? Which is protect us from the unknown. And so that's why many people will run back to the comfort zone, and the other half may freeze, right? So they'll freeze in their fear zone, and they're not quite equipped or enough or sure of how to break out of that fear zone and push through to the learning zone, which is eventually going to get you to the growth. So with everything that I've been through, Rebecca, in my life, a lot of people look at me and think, okay, she's award-winning, leadership performance expert, grit development expert. I'm an author. I'm also an athlete. I travel the world, keynote speaking, and have worked with some very big company names, like very top names out there. And I've worked with celebrities too. But how did I get there? Right? Because it's a lot of people look at me and think, oh, she's very successful. This must have been a bit of luck. Listen, you make your own luck. Right. And the biggest currency that I tell people, it's the most important to have within your life, is relationships. It's not money. Time is important too, but it's not even time for me. It is relationships, because I didn't get to where I am today on my own. You didn't get to where you are today on your own. Anyone listening didn't get to where they are on their own, right? It's the people you surround yourself with, and I call it the culture of excellence. And 8 years ago, I actually moved to this country, to America, from England with nothing. And I had a fantastic career over in England. I was earning very well. I was well known in the industry that I was working in. And I just decided I'd had enough of grit choosing me and not being equipped enough to be able to handle it. Now, I'd gone through many traumas in my past. I actually talk about it in my book, Hunt or Be Hunted. And I discuss a little bit in chapter 2, so readers can actually understand where I come from, what my background is, and how I became the expert in grit. And so I had gone through many traumas in my life that led me to the point at the age of 32, I said, that's it. I've had enough. I'm going to choose my own grit before grit chooses me again. So I moved over to America, and for 3 days, I couldn't even eat at one point because I didn't have the money to. Most people may have given up at that point and said, I'm just going to go back to the country that I grew up in. I'm going to go get a job. And bear in mind, I came here as an entrepreneur. I did not have a social security number at the time, so I couldn't go and work for anybody. I didn't have any money, didn't know where I was going to sleep. I didn't have a car. I mean, I had nothing. But the one thing that I did have that nobody could take away from me was my belief. I had my own self-belief. No matter what hit me, no matter what came my way, I never, ever, ever gave up. And I kept that vision, and I kept it strong. And I built relationships. right? I built relationships, and those relationships opened up doors for me. They knew people that they introduced me to, and so on and so on. Well, you'd think, after a few years, that's it. It's great. It's, I'm in this situation. I'm over in America. I'm making it work. I started my business. And then 2.5 years ago, I had the worst tragedy of my life hit me. And I don't think anything can ever prepare you for this, quite frankly. It's something that I never imagined that I would ever have to face. But 2.5 years ago, my youngest son, Jack, passed away. And I also nearly lost my life the same night. And quite frankly, that changed everything in my life. It changed everything about the way I'd been thinking about things, the way I approached things. See, I was always known as a very gritty individual. I've coached individuals. I've coached teams. I'm an executive coach. I coach some top executives, and I, coach them on grit and leadership and communication and so forth, even emotional intelligence. But I tell you something, when you are put in a dire situation, such as losing a child, nothing really prepares you for that. And honestly, this is how the Global Grit system was born. I'm happy to go into that in a little bit, but
Sure.
yeah.
Wow, what an introduction. And first of all, I'm so sorry to hear about your son. I can't imagine. I have two children and now grandchildren, and I can't imagine. But I find this whole topic fascinating. At one point in my life, I went through a very, very challenging time. Well, several times. If you've lived long enough, I guess you've had challenges. But I can remember finding a book called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway."
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great book for me because at the time I was a single mom working on my PhD, and it felt like I had the burdens of the world on my shoulders, and yet I knew that I needed to take some risk and step out. And I love your story. I'm sorry that you've had to experience some of the things you've had, but what a gift to give back and to share. And I'm sure that's been part of your therapy, I guess we might call it, to deal with your own challenges, to be able to share that back.
You see, yeah, I mean, how I look at it is there were, during that time period when I lost my youngest and I nearly lost my life. And when I say nearly lost my life, I mean, I was seconds from flatlining. I'm extremely lucky to be alive today. And I don't take that lightly. And it took me, there's 4 months that went by between my son passing, my nearly losing my life, to when everything kind of clicked for me. And it was a dark period in my life. And I remember sleeping in Jack's room one night, and I woke up the next morning, and it was 4 months later. It was a Monday. It was January of 2022. And I remember looking in the mirror at myself, and I said, "You got to wake up today. Your son did not. You get to feel the sun on your skin today. Your son does not. What are you going to do with all the pain, the trauma, and the grief, and everything you've been through? And how are you going to use that as a fuel to help impact others?" And I realized this wasn't about me anymore. This was about others. And that's where my mission in life became very clear, that I wanted to impact at least one person for at least one day, for every day that I'm breathing. And I've never looked back. And when you make it about others and you stop making it about yourself, the whole game changes.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize what's truly important in life. And that's where I realized, looking back, when I started to reverse engineer how I got to where I got to every single day of my life, even given the prior traumas I'd been through, which, again, you can read about them in the book. But I realized that, yes, I have used grit to push through a lot of those hard times, but I wasn't able to push and use what I call that G in my grit when my son passed. And the G in my grit system stands for get it done. And the archetype of that grit is a go-getter. Well, that's who I naturally am. But I wasn't able to just pick myself up and brush myself off and say, okay, let's move on next day. It wasn't as simple as that. because I'm human and I have emotions, and there is emotions attached to that. Now, I've learned how to repurpose those emotions and use them as a fuel. And that's actually what I had to do. I started having to reframe how I thought about the situation. And that's when it dawned on me, oh my gosh, the art and grit is reframe thinking. And so the archetype of that grit is a reframer. And so I started to realize that what if I am able to reframe how I think about the situation? It's not just going to impact me, but it's going to impact those around me. You see, I have living children and a family. And so, and I had a company, I was a leader of an organization where I had to put food on the table for these people, right? They had to feed their kids. I mean, I had a tremendous responsibility on my shoulders, all while going through this incredible tragedy and this trauma and this grief and trying to navigate through it. Well, I realized that if I started saying, look, instead of saying, look what happened to me, I would say, look what revealed me. Instead of saying, look what was taken from me, I'd say, look what was given to me. And when you start to say those things out loud, you actually have a physiological response. And so your brain starts to rewire those feelings that you're now communicating to your body in a positive manner instead of having a negative connotation to it. Now, there's nothing positive about losing a child, right? That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is I couldn't bring my son back, so I can't dwell on what I can't change. But what I can focus on is how I react to it. See, I can feel what I want to feel, and I full-heartedly want people to be able to acknowledge those feelings when they're going through any type of change, no matter how challenging or not, right? No matter the severity of the adversity. But you can feel what you feel, but how you choose to react to that is your choice. And so if you're given the tools and strategies to know how to do that and how to master it, then you'll be able to grit through anything. And so that's what I did. I started to pull from the R in my grit. I started to reframe how I looked at the situation. And then I realized by doing so, I wasn't just impacting myself, I was impacting so many others around me. And that's where the innovation came in. I started to be able to innovate my way out of challenges so they didn't become challenges anymore, they became opportunities. And the I in my grit is all about impacting others. And the archetype of that is the innovator. And so then I realized, wow, through going through this process and the system, I have to take responsibility. I have to take full ownership of everything that I'm learning and what I'm doing, and start this whole process all over again when I've reached a growth level, which has now become my new comfort level. And I have to restart the process over and over. And I thought, if I can do this, I can teach others how to do this. And so that's the T in my grit, is take responsibility, because every action that you take, every inaction that you take, it has consequences. So it is up to you to ensure that everything that you're doing, how is it impacting others? How are you reframing the situation? And how are you just getting it done? And when I started looking at that acronym and that system that I created and the types of grit that people are, I realized that everybody has grit. They just have different levels of it. So how do we start to understand which grit type we are? And that's actually what it's about to be released, but it's called the Grit Type Indicator, and it's an assessment that assesses from a percentage standpoint how gritty you are in specific situations. Are you the G, the R, the I, or the T? And it just allows not just you, like you as an individual, but people around you, teams even, right? Companies, they actually can see, do we have the right type of grit in the right seats? There's no right or wrong. It's just, do we have the right grit in those particular seats? Because it looks different for different departments within organizations. And so the more you understand that, the more that people understand that they do have grit, because most people think that it's innate, so you either have it or you don't. Well, it is innate because we're born with it, because as babies, we had to learn how to crawl, we had to learn how to walk, we had to learn how to talk, right? How many times did we fall down as children and get back up again? So many we can't remember. But over time, we start to lose it if we don't put ourselves in environments or situations that allow us to be able to harness it. You see, grit's a muscle, right? So it can be grown. It's like anything, as an athlete, if I go and train and become really great at something, I don't want to lose that. I want to keep growing and growing. If I decide not to go to training for a few weeks, well, that muscle that I've been training may start to weaken. It's the same with our grit, right? When we put ourselves in an environment to have the autonomy to learn in the way that we want to learn, That's where the self-belief comes in. And most people don't, they fail to realize there's three different learning styles. We learn through vision, we learn through listening, and we also learn through practical skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we have to ensure that we hit all three, whether it's, me as a speaker on stage, whether it's through programs, workshops, whatever type of programs, leadership program, whatever it is, right, that people are going through, you have to hit all three. Otherwise, they're going to leave maybe feeling inspired, but not necessarily empowered. And so a few months down the line, when they've got that challenge that they're faced with, they should be able to recall immediately which tool to pull out of the tool bag that you've taught them. And so that's what my job is, right? That's my responsibility to ensure that I hit all three learning styles and teach them how to use their grit in specific different challenges in their life. And it doesn't have to be as severe as what I've gone through with losing a child, right? It can be, you've got some conflict that you're trying to resolve, whether it's at home or at work. Perhaps there's change coming. Change is inevitable. Change is always around us. It's always going to hit us. Are we prepared for it, right? Are our team members prepared for it? Are our family members prepared for it? How do we navigate through that? Because there's always a path. There's always a path. We just have to believe and understand that there is a way through. And when you can believe it, that's when you're motivated to keep going. And the motivation helps influence how you think. And when you influence your cognition, that's when you're able to actually alter your brain processes. So you're literally rewiring the brain. That leads to a growth mindset. And then when you've been able to adopt a growth mindset, you're now able to apply the very thing that you're trying to learn in the first place. I actually do talk about that. It's in chapter 5 of my book, Hunt to Be Hunted. But I do actually talk about that. But it is, everything's scientifically backed, and it is a process, right? But we have to follow it. We have to have the discipline to follow it.
Yeah. So this is all very interesting and very related to a lot of the work that I've done and a lot of the work that many educators are doing with entrepreneurship students. A book I wrote a couple of years ago is called See, Do, Repeat. And when I heard you talk about learning to walk, it's the same philosophy. I did many years of research on competencies for entrepreneurs. And I talk about competencies rather than just mindset, because that's the mind behavior connection, competencies. And in that, that see, do, repeat stands for seeing opportunities, being willing to take action, and executing past failures. So I could see where your grit model could be very helpful for a lot of the people that are, that are trying to start a business, entrepreneurs, or people that are in the throes of, starting or running a business, because there's always failure, there's always challenges, and I love the way you've put your model together. There were several things in there I wanted to kind of dig into. You talked a lot about the importance of really having a purpose. When you talked about, taking it, it's not about ourselves, but about others, and having that purpose. And I work with a lot of young people who say, I have no idea what my purpose is. And your story is an interesting one, because as you pointed out, you didn't go out and seek grit, it found you. And so talk to us a little bit about how you think about that, about finding, if you're coaching or working with someone young and they're not sure what their purpose is in life, how do you help them think about that?
I start to challenge them in terms of, I want them to choose their own grit, right? So even though I went through my life not choosing my own grit until 8 years ago when I came to this country, I wish I had chosen my grit sooner, right? Instead of allowing grit to choose me. So if I were to talk to my younger self, or if there's a member in the audience listening who's, say they're just starting out, they're just leaving university, just starting out in their career, but they still are not fully sure what their purpose is. I say it does come in time, right? It's not necessarily something that you just know immediately. I think it's something that you find out through going through grit. And that's why it's so important to choose your own grit. Now, I'm not suggesting you choose grit that's going to put your life in danger or do anything crazy like that. But I'm suggesting, like, for example, as an athlete, I have chosen every single day to train at a very intense level, to the point where I compete nationally, in fact, not just nationally, but worldwide. And that is a grit that most people probably wouldn't want to go down the path of, because it's hard, right? So why do we make the decision to not choose grit? Because we feel more better in our comfort zone, right? We feel safer in our comfort zone. So what I would say is, I want to challenge you to break out of that mold. Do something that's really uncomfortable. The one thing that you've been putting off that you know you need to do, take action on it and just do it. And if you fail, so what? You get back up, you learn, right? If you'll never get to where you want to be without having failures, I can guarantee you that. Every successful person that you speak with will tell you the same thing. If anyone thinks that I got to where I am today without having setbacks and falling down and failing, they're mistaken, because I definitely had that. I still do, right? You learn from it. And every time you fall back down, you get back up. You get back up stronger, because now you're equipped with some tools to know, okay, if this happens again, I know not to do this. I'm going to do this. And so, yes, it comes in time, but I will highly encourage anyone that is unsure of what their purpose is, or what it is they really want to do, or if they want to make an impact in the world, what does that look like? I would say you've got to surround yourself with people that have either done what you're thinking of doing, or that are at a higher level than what you're doing, and just surround yourself in a culture of excellence, right? Surround yourself with other people that can push you to do those hard things, whether that's through mentorship, whether through a coach, whether it's friends that you're around, whoever it is that you want to surround yourself with, ensure that they are the ones that are going to push you. Because when the going gets tough, you do not want someone to say, oh, that's okay, you can give up if you want. I don't
Right.
believe in that. I don't believe in that. I think if the going gets tough, you want someone that's going to put their hand out and say, here, I got you. I'm going to help you. Let's go.
So, yeah, you
So,
talked about people. This is, I think, the second time you mentioned the importance of other people
mhm.
and working with people. So, how do you think about uh, finding the right people to work with? I mean, what do you look for? Obviously, I'm sure there are a lot of people in your network, but what do you look for in terms of finding those people that maybe you let into your closest inner circle, or that you might have looked to over the years as mentors yourself?
Well, one of my very first mentors I had was actually the owner of a company that I worked for over in England. And I was a, young 21-year-old at the time. And I was quite ballsy even back then. And there was something I didn't agree with. And I went to his office, knocked on his door, and I basically said, hey, I think that we can do this differently. And I talked to him about the situation. I told him, and I said, just let me at it. Let me have this challenge. And so he did. And he gave me, like, because I challenged someone that was much more senior to me, that had been doing this for 20 plus years. And here I was, this young whippersnapper coming out of university, walking into his office saying, I think we can do it a different way. And I think this way could actually work out a little better. You got to trust me on it. Because I had the courage to challenge someone that was senior, I didn't look at them as though they were necessarily better than me in a lot of ways. I just saw them as someone that was extremely experienced. And so what I brought to the table may not have been the experience, but I brought new innovation. I brought new ideas, because some of his ideas were 20 plus years old. My ideas were very fresh. And so I had the courage to challenge. And because of that, that particular mentor of mine gave me the opportunity, which gave me the belief that I could go out and do it, which motivated me to go and do it, right? And that slowly started to influence how not just I thought, but other people around me thought. So I think it's about finding the people that are experienced. Doesn't mean that they're better or worse than you. It just means they are more experienced. In most cases, they are going to be much more successful than you, because they do have that experience under their belt. I remember seeking out CEOs of some top companies, and you might think, well, how do you get in front of them? Like, how do you even get access to them? People love to be asked for help. And so, as a young woman, I did not hesitate to reach out to some very senior people that I didn't really know. They may have known someone I knew, or, I just asked people to introduce me to other people in their network. And eventually I was in front of them. But the way that I did that is because I wanted to ensure that I was going to be surrounded with people that could help me. I wasn't looking for handouts. I wasn't looking for people to just bail me out of situations. I wasn't looking for any. I just wanted to learn from some of the best in the industry. And so, in fact, I do a lot of this work myself. I do some pro bono work for a very large nonprofit called Warrior Rising. And I sit on their advisory board, and I actually help veterans that transition out of military and start their own businesses. So we call them veterapreneurs, right? So they're entrepreneurs that were veterans, that are transitioning. And it's incredible when you see them. And some of them, are a lot older than me, but they're not looking at me as though, oh, because I'm young, I'm not as experienced, or because I wasn't in the military, I don't understand, their life. It doesn't work like that. There's a respect level of, they bring something to the table, I bring something to the table, and it's, what can we do with the two meeting in the middle? How do we make that mesh, right? How do we ensure that you gain strength from that? And this is also actually an important point, because a lot of people will come to me and say, well, I'm really weak in this area. And I say, well, what are your strengths? Because I want to focus on the strengths. I believe in strength-based coaching. So I want to focus on the strengths, really get those strong. And then I can say, we can work on some of the weaknesses. But then I say, well, who around you do you have? What are their strengths? Because if you've got some weakness, but you've got an incredible support network, or what I call your culture of excellence, if you've got individuals around you that are strong in the areas that you are weak, then pull from those, right? That's where people come in. You don't get to where you are alone, right? My book's called Hunt or Be Hunted, and I talk about becoming the hunter versus being hunted. Well, the moment that you stop protecting your pride, as I call it, or you try to go out on your own as a lone wolf, you're eventually going to become hunted, because you're going to have so many others around you that are learning how to be the hunters. And so they are going to be on top of their game, whereas you might get to where you want to be on your own. It will take you a heck of a long time, and you're going to have a heck of a lot more failures. So why not pull from the strength of others? And that's how you actually strengthen those weaknesses, because you learn from them. So it's incredibly important that you surround yourself with those types of people, and don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Even if you think that person's out of reach, they're not. They're human. They're a person just like you. They're no better or worse. They're just different, right? They've just gone about the way they've done business, life differently. So learn from that.
I think that's all great advice. And I love that you talk about the reciprocity of the relationship, because it is two people coming together. And I know some of the people that I've mentored over the years, I've learned as much from as they've been able to learn from me. So I think it works both ways, and it's a mutual respect. And that's kind of how you get the most out of it. So great advice on that. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about building your company and your brand. So you're obviously very accomplished. You're a consultant, a speaker, a book author. You've had other business experience and entrepreneurial experience. How do you think about building your brand, and in particular today? And we live in a world where digital marketing is incredibly important. So for those people who are interested in building their own brand, can you provide some thoughts on what you've done, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked?
I'm going to have one word for this: authenticity. It is huge, right? You have to be authentic. You've got to be yourself. See, most people make the mistake when they start branding, they'll brand the company or the company name, even if it's just you as an individual, or even if you've only got a few people in the team. So as an entrepreneur, they tend to focus more on the company name and the company rather than you yourself. That's a mistake. You should actually focus on you as the entrepreneur to show people that you are authentic. And what does authenticity do? It builds trust. So why do people want to do business with you? Because they trust you. You could have the best product, the best service in the world, but if they don't like you and they don't trust you, they're never going to do business with you. And so you have to ensure that you are showing people, listen, I do this because I'm doing it for you. And that's 100% what I do, right? I changed everything about my life when my son passed. And I just said, that's it. I'm focusing on other people. I've been given a second chance to live. I'm not going to waste it. And so therefore, when you start putting other people in front of your own needs and you actually realize, well, how can I help this person? That's where the trust builds. And actually, it's so incredibly satisfying for you as an individual to know that you've helped that person, right? And so authenticity is a big key to branding and ensuring that you stay true to who you are and understand what you're an expert in. This is where a lot of people kind of tend to fall down. I'll say, well, who are you? What do you do? Some people will say, they'll give their job title as an example. I'm like, that doesn't really tell me who you are. That's just a title. So let's not hide behind titles. I want to know who you are. So when people ask, Lara, what is it that you do? I tell them, I say, I'm a leadership performance and a grit development expert. Usually it gets them questioning like, oh, what is that about? What is the grit development side? See, most people talk about grit, but they don't talk about developing it. And that's where I immediately stand out. So as an entrepreneur, you have to understand, how are you different? If I just said I'm a leadership performance expert, well, there's so many people out there that do leadership performance. I don't just work with leaders though. You know, I work with sales teams, I work with operations, I work with a whole ton of different divisions in companies. But what I focus on is developing grit in those people, in those companies, in those teams. So as an entrepreneur, when you're starting out your brand, really understand which category you're in. Create your own category. Like there's a lot of people out there that talk about grit, but there's no one out there talking about developing it. So I've created my own category, and that's part of branding, right? I've branded myself as Lara Jones, the expert in grit development. So when anyone thinks we need more grit in our team, Lara Jones, right? That's how branding works. They think when you start to have one specific word that you attach to your brand. So for me, it's grit, right? When you start using a word that attaches to your brand, people are going to remember you more. You want to be authentic. You want to show people the real you. Why do I talk about my athleticism, right? Because it shows a different side of me. Why do I talk about my book? It shows a different side of me on the north of there. Why do I talk sometimes about my children? It shows a different side. Why do I talk about the grief I went through? It's showing all different avenues and faces of who Lara Jones is, because I'm not just one side, right? I'm multiple different sides of, and when it comes together, that's who Lara Jones is. That's what makes up my brand. And so authenticity is absolutely key. People will be able to sniff through and see through any fakeness or falseness. I'm not a fan of it. I like people to be real with me. I've even said to people when they've met with me or they're trying to sell to me, I just cut through all of it and I say, who are you? Who am I really dealing with? Because I want to know, I want to see behind the curtains, right? I want to see behind that, like peeling back that onion. I want to see, who am I really, really dealing with here? Because that person I might want a long relationship with from a business standpoint, and therefore I need to know how they react in certain situations, how they've approached life. What have they done in this situation? What have they done in that situation? So I know it's quite a long answer for what you asked me, but the key word here is authenticity, because you've got to be able to build trust. So focus on who you are and show people the real you. They want to know the person behind the brand. They don't just want to see the company name, right? Because anyone can hide behind that. They want to know who you are.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that your advice about building as an entrepreneur, building your brand, personal
Mm-hmm.
brand, not just your company brand, the
Yes.
importance of that. I love that. How about the having a conversation with your community, and even preceding that, knowing who your community is? What kind of process did you go through to figure out, your market, and how do you encourage a relationship, which is kind of what we have to think about today, I think, in digital marketing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of it as well is you don't quite know when you're starting out, right? You don't quite know. And so some people will hold back and try to find the information out before they start. Others will just go for it and figure it out as they go along. I'm kind of the latter one, right? I like to just say yes, do it anyway, and figure it out later. So for myself, I knew that a lot of people out there struggled with grit. I'd had so many different conversations with people prior to launching this side. But truthfully, it was when I went through my horrific trauma that I realized, and I was brave enough to come out with what had happened, because I will be honest, as a woman and a leader, I was a little nervous about coming out with what I'd been through, because I didn't want to be seen as weak, right? As, a mother that had lost a child, I'm going to be incredibly emotional about it. And so I didn't want to be seen as weak. Well, I decided to say, and it was, 4 months later, I just decided it doesn't matter if people think that or not, because if they think that, they're not the right audience for me, right? They're not the right people. In fact, they've actually got a fixed mindset. So the people that I was trying to, go after, if you will, or really get them to understand that more is possible, are the ones that actually do have a form of growth mindset in them. They just didn't have the tools necessary to know how to get there. And now the ones that, and don't get me wrong, I do come across those individuals that have a fixed mindset. It just takes longer with them, right? It would take a number of sessions for them to truly understand how they can break out of that. Now, when I keynote speak, it's incredible, because sometimes I'm talking in front of thousands, sometimes it's a few hundred, sometimes it's a small group, like it's only 50. And you don't really know who's sitting in the audience. You don't know how many have a growth mindset, how many have a fix. But I can guarantee you this, at the end, everybody is intrigued, right? I have so many people come up to me and they ask me about it. And so I think that it's something that you start to learn as you go through the journey, as you're going through the process, and you're not going to get it right immediately. And this is the thing, as an entrepreneur, you continually have to innovate. You have to pull from the iron grit, because if what you're developing or producing or selling, whatever it is as an entrepreneur, what you're trying to do, you've always got to remember, how is this going to impact others? Always keep that at the forefront of your mind, because it's not about you, it's about others. So the more that you think, how is this going to impact this particular audience, you start to narrow down who your target market actually is. For me, I don't work in any specific industry. I've worked with the financial sector. I've worked in healthcare. I've worked in the tech industry. I've worked in the law firm industry. Like, I've worked in a lot of different industries. So you've got to say to yourself, is it industry specific? Is it people specific, as in like job titles, positions? Or is it, is the impact that you're going to make for society? So you have to really kind of gauge, where is the biggest impact going to be, and then address a model with how you're going to achieve that. So obviously you're going to have a business plan with how you're going to achieve that, but you've got to start narrowing down, who is my target market? If you are sort of all over the place and you're trying to do everything, then you're not really an expert. When you say you're an expert in something, you've got to stick to that. So if somebody comes to me and wants me to teach, I don't know, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but if somebody wants me to teach something about something in tech, something very technical, maybe with AI or something. No, I'm not the person to do that. I'm a grit development expert, so I'm going to stick to that. And it's okay to say no, right? And that's, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs get scared of doing, is they're afraid to say no, because in the entrepreneur world, you can have ups and downs, and you don't always know where the next, check's coming in from. But you've got to understand that if you don't say no, you're harming yourself. The elimination is the key to success. The more you learn how to eliminate unnecessary tasks, or saying no to an opportunity that, when you look at it on a bigger scale, probably isn't going to be much of an opportunity, it's actually going to hinder you, it becomes empowering. The more that you realize, as you're using these particular tools, all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm sticking to my path, and I'm able to just get rid of the distractions and focus on the end goal. And you will get there, but you've got to have the discipline to stay on that path and ignore the distractions, right? Because you're going to get people coming in trying to, oh, here's some candy over here, here's some candy here. And, it's like shiny object syndrome. You get, there's a lot of people out there that do that. You have to remain disciplined and ensure that you have a plan and action of how you're going to eliminate those distractions, because they will happen. They will happen.
That's great advice. I mean, I think it can be summed up that the creating value in a niche, right? The riches are in the niches, I think.
Yes.
Sometimes said. But, creating value in that niche and staying focused on it. And that is so hard if you love opportunity and you get excited by opportunity. I know personally that's always been a struggle for me, the bright, shiny object, syndrome. But I think that's such great advice. I have to ask you, because it's clear that you have pushed through and persevered in many instances in your life. But when are there times that we need to stop, to give up? And you kind of alluded to, that when you talked about trying a lot of different things. But how when do we know, or is there a time that we stop, that we give up? And what
So
does that look like?
it's a really great question. I've actually been asked this before by people. They're like, well, what if, you keep pushing and nothing's changing? You've obviously got to be able to recognize when to change it. So it's not about giving up. It's about reframing it. So that's when I would pull from the R and grit. So if something is not working in a specific way and you've tried it multiple different times, then let's look at the situation again. Let's reframe, and maybe we switch focus. So it's not about giving up or switching off. It's about switching your focus in that particular moment. Maybe the type of grit you're applying in that moment is not the correct one. And so how do you know if it's not the correct one? Well, if you keep failing at it, right? So therefore, pull from the R and grit and reframe the situation. And that's where you've also got to pull from the I, because you've got to learn how to innovate your way out of challenges. So it's not one or the other, right? It's not, okay, if I don't do this, I'm just going to give up. It's changing and reframing how you think about it. And I've always said that grit is not about running away from the situation. It's about changing your perspective in the midst of the situation. And the more that people remember that, the more that they can really pull from that thinking and say, okay, I'm going to reframe how I think about this, the more successful they will be. You see, when my son passed and I reframed everything and I started this whole journey on speaking worldwide and becoming an author. And don't get me wrong, when I wrote my book, I was also competing in a worldwide competition. I was running a business. I'm a mother of little children. And I was traveling. The pressure was on, but I didn't give up. I learned how to time block. And I also ensured that the three pieces, that are very important that make up Lara, which is family, my athleticism, and my business, right? All these three components are just as important as each other. I ensured that I gave time to each one of those. And if I felt like it was a little bit off balance, then I would alter that. I would never give up, though. And see, in fact, I've got a great brief story on this. So recently, I just competed in another World Series fitness competition. It's called High Rocks, and I just competed in that. Now, I had been traveling so much. I'd have to, in March, I think I was here for only 6 days, in the state that I live, and I was traveling all the remainder of the time. And April was equally a very busy month. And so therefore, I wasn't able to train with my fellow athletes as much as I wanted to. I also was sick an awful lot, because my immune system was a little lower. I've been pushing my body, pretty frequently. And so I had to make a decision and take responsibility and say, okay, well, the options are, my doctor actually wanted me to pull out. She said, your body needs a rest. I said, I know, but instead of just pulling out completely and giving up, let's reframe it. Let's look at it differently. So instead of doing singles, I did doubles out there, which is a little different, right? I only had to do half the work. It's not easy because you go full at it, when it is your turn to race in that competition. But I was able to find a happy medium. So I just reframed the situation. Instead of giving up completely and pulling out, I said, no, I'm still going to do it. I still committed time to doing this. I still dedicated many hours of training to this. I'm not giving up. I'm just going to do it as a double. And therefore, it just gives my body that slight bit of rest in between the movements. So it's, I can slow my heart rate from a zone 5 down to maybe a zone 3 or a zone 2. And it just allows my body to not be as stressed. That's a perfect example of being able to reframe the situation instead of just giving up entirely. Or, when I started the business, if something wasn't working in one particular area, I didn't just give up. I switched it. Right? And that's where the I comes in. You've got to be able to innovate. As an entrepreneur, you really do have to have all 4 areas of grit. And everyone's going to be more focused on one specific area because that's going to be from within, and that's going to be your natural ability to harness that particular area. But the part of growth is you've got to harness all four. You see, to get out of comfort zone and get into fear, you've got to apply the G, right? You've got to just get it done, take action. To get out of fear and get into the learning zone, you have to pull from the R. You've got to reframe how you think about situations so you can look at them differently. To get out of the learning zone and get into the growth zone, you've got to pull from the I. You've got to be able to innovate your way out of challenges so they're not challenges and they become opportunities. And in doing so, you're going to be able to impact so many other people. And then as you get to that growth, that's where the T comes in. You've now got to take responsibility to start that entire process all over again, and your new growth becomes your new growth becomes your new comfort. And so now it starts again: comfort, fear, learning, growth, and it's the G-R-I-T. So you can't really get to growth without harnessing all four areas of grit. So, as a leader, whether or not you see yourself as a leader, you are, right? Because you've got other people looking to you, you've got other people watching you that you don't even know are watching, and you could be influencing their next move and their decision on what they do next. And so it is a great responsibility as an entrepreneur that everything that you're doing, every decision that you're making, it's impacting everyone else around you, whether you can see them or not. And so as a leader, you've got to be able to get it done, reframe how you think, impact others, and take responsibility. And so that spells grit. You can't be a leader without grit.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And again, your model fits beautifully with the goal of figuring out what to do when you're facing that, not just an obstacle, but a boulder in the road. A lot of entrepreneurs talk to me about that too. How do I know what to do? And one of my suggestions is to always go back to the problem they're trying to solve for their customer, because a lot of times the solution we pick to solve it isn't exactly right, but the problem still exists and we can modify that. And that's reframing, I think, the way you're talking about it. So great advice.
Absolutely.
So I have to ask you, you talked about the importance of family and fitness and your business. So do you have balance in your life, and how do you think about balance? Does it exist for an entrepreneur?
So I will say this, that I don't like life work balance. I don't like people talking about life work balance, because as an entrepreneur, your work is your life, right? It's something that you should be really passionate about. What I mean by that is I wake up every day not even feeling like I'm working, to be honest. I'm so passionate about it. I believe it so wholeheartedly that it applies in every single area of my life. And I mentioned earlier that there's three major components. It's family, it's my fitness, and also my business. Well, they all go hand in hand. That if you think of a pie chart and they all have a third, if there's one that's slightly off kilter, so for example, back in January and February, I was really going full at it with my fitness tremendously because I knew I had some busy months coming up and I knew I had a competition. And so I was spending a lot of time doing that, making a lot of sacrifices. Well, as a result, it meant I had less time, whether it's with family or focused on the business. So I very quickly said, no, that's out of alignment. So we have to make adjustments. So then I would scale back slightly, whether it would, I would go at a different time, for my fitness or whatever it may be. I just changed it. So I always ensured that I had equal parts in that pie chart for everyone in my life. And so one of the biggest ways to do that is you've got to time block. You've got to say, okay, from this hour to this hour, this is what I'm focused on. And then from this time to this time, this is what I'm focused on. And if there's any distractions that come in, you have to learn how to say no. You have to learn how to eliminate. You see, I talk about this in chapter 6 of the book, and I use the Eisenhower matrix. And it's very powerful. And I often say to people, which box do you find yourself in? Are you in the urgent and important? Are you in the not important and urgent? Are you in the not important and not urgent? And so on and so on. Most people say to me, they're in the not important and urgent box. I say, well, why on earth are you in that? Right? Or they say to me, I'm in the urgent and important box. I say, well, that's just going to lead to your stress levels. The box we really want to strive to be in is important, because otherwise, why do the work if it's not important, right? You could be in the important and the not urgent, because that way you are doing the quality of the work that you need to be doing that's important to get you to where you want to be the next day. But it's not urgent, which means that you haven't got the anxiety or the stress levels. The only reason something is urgent is because you've procrastinated. Or there could be something that maybe has come in that, okay, you can't always control those situations where urgency comes in, but it's how are you going to navigate that? Do you have another team member? If it's just you, then okay, you've got to learn how to manage that in your time. So you look at the time blocking and say, where can I fit this in? If you've got a team member, can you delegate that particular task to a team member that maybe could be stronger in that particular realm? So in answer to the question, I don't believe in a life-work balance. I believe that work is your life if you're really passionate about it. And so what I mean by that is, I wake up every day excited to do what I do. And if you don't wake up excited to do what you do, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. And that's where I would challenge you to say, don't just do it for money, right? Ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for money? Am I doing it for the title? Or am I doing it for others? And really question that and say, why am I doing what I do? And if you wait, and it's important that you have that why, because there are going to be days that you wake up that you're not going to feel like it that particular morning. And then if you remember what your why is, even if you have it written down, next to your bed, or you have a symbol of some kind, that for me, I have a pin of baby feet from my son, Jack. And so I look at that every day and I think, that's my why. That's why I do what I do, even on the days that I don't feel like, getting up that morning because I'm exhausted, from the day before. I follow the 5 pillars to try to ensure that I don't burn out. And this is what a lot of people get scared of, especially entrepreneurs. They think that grit, like if you constantly apply grit, that it becomes a grind and it's going to lead to burnout. Grit doesn't lead to burnout. What leads to burnout is grit unchecked. So you have to check your grit with the 5 pillars. And I talk about that. I believe that's in chapter 3 of the book, but I do talk about that. And you've got to follow those 5 pillars. The one piece of advice I can give to entrepreneurs is you've got to look after what I call your hardware, because your software is always going, right? It's your brain, in order to ensure that you're working at an optimum level and to the level that you're really capable of. And this doesn't just apply to entrepreneurs, it really applies to anybody. But you've got to look after your hardware. See, when you have a phone and you have a laptop, what do? You charge it, right? So it has battery life. Well, if you continue to abuse it, and maybe you drop it a few times, maybe you don't care because you think in a few years I can just upgrade it. What do you think happens to your body if you do that? You're not going to get another body. So you have to look after what I call your hardware, which is your physical self, to ensure that your software, which is your organs and your brain, and your brain's an organ, you've got to give it what it needs in order for it to work at a very high level. And when you look at high performers and people that are successful, I'll tell you this, they follow the 5 pillars. How do I know? I've tested this so many times. I do it myself, but I've tested it so many times as a speaker. When I'm up on stage, I should get the audience to stand up and we go through this process. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And people realize, oh my gosh, if I could just follow these extra 2 pillars, or maybe I'm doing 2 out of the 5 pillars, maybe I'm doing 4 out of 5, maybe I'm doing none. But if I follow these 5 pillars, the difference that's going to make me feel, I'm now going to have what we call the balance, right? It doesn't become a life-work balance, but it just becomes a balance in your life between all the different areas that you're trying to navigate. Whoever you are outside of work is who you're going to be inside work. And some people have argued with me saying, no, I'm 2 different people. I say, well, then in that case, you're not authentic, because whoever you are outside of work should be the same as what you are inside work, and vice versa. People that know me, that have met me, I'm no different, when I'm with my family. I'm no different when I'm speaking on stage, and I'm no different when I'm in the fitness, right? It's all of it is combined, together. And so that's why I mentioned earlier about authenticity. It is so crucial for you to maintain that in order for you to have what I call balance.
Yeah, that's great advice. One quote from an entrepreneur that I've worked with is, "The way you do anything is the way you do anything is the way you do everything." And
Yeah,
I think
that's
it
true.
goes back to what you're saying, and authenticity is so important, not just to keep, not just for our brand, but it keeps us grounded, I think, to
Yes.
remain authentic. So
Yes,
this has been
absolutely.
a wonderful conversation, Laura. I know we could talk on for a long time. Your book is a perfect book for entrepreneurs, hunt or be hunted. And so I just would love for our audience to know a little bit more about where they can find you and where they can find your book and how they might even be able to invite you in to be a speaker or a consultant.
Yeah, oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, Rebecca. So,
Sure.
if anyone that is wanting to get a copy of the book, I highly encourage you to, because it would be an incredible tool, not just for you, but for others around you that you can help teach. But it's called Hunt or Be Hunted: How Anyone Can Develop Grit and Lead Like a Legend. It's available on Amazon. It's worldwide. It's available on Amazon worldwide, no matter whether you're in America or not. You can also visit my website, which is larajones.com, and it's Lara. There is no U in my name. So larajones.com. And also, I actually have a little something I would love to give the audience today, because I've talked a lot
Sure.
about the grit system, and I'm sure people will probably be intrigued. You'll learn a lot more about it in the book. But also, I kind of encourage you to write down one thing that you've been putting off that you really need to take action on. So if you're listening, do that, right? Write it down right now. Think about one thing that you've been putting off that you really want to take action on. And I'm going to give you something to help you achieve that. So all you have to do is text the word grit to 55444. So that's 55444. Just text the word grit to that number, and you will receive a free grit accountability guide. And it's just going to allow you to have a brief overview of the grit system and see how you can apply. There's like different exercises in there, how you can apply it in different situations. It's just a brief guide, but it's incredibly helpful. So just text the word grit to 55444. You can visit me on larajones.com. The best way to actually contact me is through LinkedIn. So if you find me, if you put Lara Jones, Be a Legend, which is one of my company names, or Lara Jones Grit Global, I will come up. And connect with me on there or follow me. I give out daily content every single day. So it's very inspirational, but also there's tools available in there. So you can get free little golden nuggets and snippets just through my content daily. And if you do want to schedule a call with me, obviously just go to the website. There's a section where you can schedule a call. I think it's under the executive coaching section, but there's multiple ways to find me. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. But yes, I highly encourage you, text the word grit to 55444, connect with me on LinkedIn, and buy the book on Amazon, Hunt or Be Hunted.
Thank you, Lara.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it.